The one statistic the Trump fanboys don't want you to know. Ooh, because I'm a Trump fanboy. I said, I'd like to read this because I'm a Trump fanboy. Keep going, Trump. You're crushing. I salute you, sir. I am wearing my shirt because we're getting ready to go to church, and it's Easter Sunday, and Jesus is risen. Hallelujah, man. Hallelujah. Jesus is risen. Remember, Peter denied Jesus not once, not twice, but thrice. And then somehow later he died for Jesus in a most excruciating way. He was so scared to be identified as one of Jesus' followers. He said, I don't know who that guy is. And then later he said, yeah, no, I'm totally a Jesus follower. I'm going to promote the gospel, the good news. Something must have happened to make Peter change his mind. I don't know, maybe he got a speeding ticket or something like that. And he said, I got changed. Maybe he got drunk one night. He said, oh man, I can't do this anymore. Or maybe he saw the risen Jesus. Just throwing it out there. All right. The Trump tariff, or the tariff tax statistic the Trump fanboys don't want you to know about. Fox commentator Charles Payne recently repeated, and this is from Thomas DiLorenzo over at the Mises Institute. I'm a fan of Thomas DiLorenzo. He used to I don't know if he substituted for Rush, but he used to be on the Rush Limbaugh channel quite a lot. His go-to economist. And I can't believe he's writing this. This is nuts to me. All right, so the fallacy goes like this, Buchanan and Charles Payne. Economic growth occurred during the post-Civil War period up to the turn of the century. High protectionist tariffs were imposed during the Lincoln regime and lasted for some 50 years. Therefore, the protectionist tariffs caused the economic growth. And Thomas will make the analogy that, yes, and the rooster crows in the morning, then the sun comes up, therefore the rooster crows causes the sun to come up. That's a good analogy. But Thomas, you're striking out here. It's actually incredible to me that you don't see this. All right, let's keep going. It was the absence of an income taxation and hardly noticeable regulatory regime that were the most important policies related to the post-Civil War growth, along with the existence of the gold standard in various forms, that allowed for the post-Civil War growth. The gold standard was absolutely just. Do you not know what happened in the 1890s, Thomas? We needed the House of Rothschild to bail us out. The Belmont-Morgan Agreement. We needed not one, not two, not three, but 4 bailouts because the gold standard was falling apart. Come on, dude. But then he does say, which is interesting, is we had no income taxation and hardly noticeable regulatory regime that related to the post-Civil War growth. Okay, we're going to come back to that here in a second. International trade was a small fraction of the entire economy. It just was not. I mean, show me otherwise, but reading Brad DeLong, who's a big anti-tariff guy, a pretty mainstream economist that I think worked for Clinton or Obama, I don't know, big liberal. And he said in his own white paper, this is might be his PhD dissertation, I don't know. But anyway, he said in his white paper, if you actually look at it, international trade, and we know international trade was about the same relative to it was called GNP back then as it is today. About 10 to 13% of the economy was international trade, and that's pretty much what it is today. It's actually, in fact, you can even say it was more, international trade was more relative to GNP than it is today back then. So, I mean, he claims this, but he doesn't give any reason to see where his claim comes from other than it sounds good in theory. It was just an agricultural economy, don't you know? But anyway, I find it funny because he says international trade was a small fraction of the entire economy. Just not true. So tariff taxes on imports could not have possibly been the one cause of post-war prosperity, as Buchanan and Payne now argue. And that's a straw man. I don't know the exact argument of Buchanan and Payne, but do they actually say the one cause that led to our prosperity was tariff? And if that's not what they said, then you're building up a straw man. You're creating an argument that's not made so you can tear it down. And that's just weak stuff there. And I'm surprised that Thomas DiLorenzo. Now, I don't believe they said the one cause of the growth was because of tariff. But if they did, they're wrong too. But I don't think they did. As such, Thomas DiLorenzo is a straw manning here for sure. In addition, many of the tariff taxes were imposed on inputs used in manufacturing process by American corporations, hindering economic growth. All right, so Thomas wants it both ways here. He says there was economic growth, but because we had tariffs, it hindered economic growth. Thus, there wasn't as much economic growth. Okay, this is all. Oh man, Josh, just think if you got a degree in not in economics but in sociology, you'd be a multimillionaire now, don't you know? Okay, I mean maybe, but the same thing here. Don't you know there would have been more growth if there wasn't tariffs? Let's keep going. The period of protectionist tariff plunder was especially harmful to American farmers because a tax on imports eventually became a de facto tax on exports. And farmers exported huge amount of their produce. Wait. Farmers exported huge amount of their produce, but then before here he says international trade was a small fraction of the entire economy. So if the economy was basically all agriculture and farmers exported huge amounts of their produce, then how can you say international trade was a small portion of the overall economy? It's freaking stupid, man. This is the same paragraph. Let's see. This is because impoverishing American trading partners by blocking them from selling here results in the fact that they have fewer dollars with which to buy American goods. Well, first of all, you're not blocking them from selling here. You're saying you can still trade here. It's just you have to pay a higher import tax. It's just it's stupid. And then he says right here, at that time that was American goods, that was overwhelmingly farm produce. So again, Thomas is saying that is overwhelmingly farm produce, and farmers exported huge amounts of their products, but yet we had international trade with a small fraction of the economy. In the same paragraph, he's completely just disingenuous. Does anyone read this guy before he publishes it? And by the way, let's see. In fact, they have fewer dollars which to buy American goods. In fact, the interesting thing is before the McKinley tariff, the UK, which is the largest economy in the world, and Europe as a whole was going to a massive depression. They're already stepping back on American exports and whatnot. They're already getting rid of the gold. They're selling their gold back to us. They're already saying because they were basically trying to consolidate because they're going through massive depression well before the McKinley tariff in 1890. Never mind the Dingley tariff in 1897. And of course, the Dingley tariff in 1897, the Europeans had already come out of their depression, and the Dingley tariff almost to the day coincided, if you will, with the American coming out of our own Great Depression from 1893 to 1897. And by the way, what did farmers want? Did farmers scream bloody murder about tariffs? Yes, they did. But what did they want? Did they want a gold standard? No, they did not. They wanted a bimetal economic gold standard with silver as a standard too. The Sherman Silver Act was passed, I want to say 1890 or something like that, I can't remember. And one of the reasons that a lot of the gold was falling off a cliff because we're exporting, is countries thought we were going to get off the gold standard because of Sherman Silver Act. And the farmers said, no, we don't want to be on the gold standard. We want an income tax as opposed to a tariff because that will inflate the currency. And if we can't get an income tax, we want silver to basically compete with gold as a source of currency. So it's not that the farmers said we don't want a tariff and no taxes. We want an income tax. We don't want a tariff, but we also want to inflate the currency by getting off the gold standard because it's a massive deflation. And it's going on well before McKinley happened, by the way, in 1890. Just stupid here. So tariff taxes also reduced the disposable income of the American working class during that time, as it did not. I mean, it did during the Great Depression of 1893 to 1897. And you can read this book by Charles Hoffman, The Depression of the 1890s, and it just gives you literally a play-by-play. It just did not. 1897 to 1913, the American economy was going through the roof. Inflation did kick in a little bit, so much that in the latter part of the 1900s that people started griping about inflation, even though we were still supposedly on the gold standard. And we hadn't had an income tax yet either. And we had massive tariffs under Dingley. I mean, I just find this funny, because he said the disposable income of the American working class during that time, it did go down during that time. Actually, the funny thing is the disposable income of the American working class, the people who maintain employment, their income went down less than the prices went down, as Hoffman talks about in this well-researched book, by the way. You can see it. But now the question is, did you have employment? Now, there's high employment during the Depression of 1893, 1897, upwards of 15%. But the people who kept their job, their income went down less than the prices as a whole went down. And then we had the Dingley tariff, and guess what? Then economic malaise was behind us, and we had massive economic growth. And as such, we became the largest economy in the world, supplementing the Brits in the early 1900s. Because the Brits pursued a free trade program and we pursued mass tariffs. Furthermore, what these two cheerleaders for the quintessentially anti-populist policy of protectionist plunder of average Americans were true, then there should have been hardly any economic growth at all from the end of World War II until today, when the tariff rate declined for 78 years from about 11% to 2.5. And then he uses this graph right here, which I literally can't believe he's using this to make his argument. So here we got the McKinley tariff right there. The Democrats took over. They dropped a little bit. Here's the Dingley tariff right here. All right, right up there. So basically 30% was the average tariff. All right. And then basically kept on until about 1913 when we had the income tax. They dropped the tariff all the way down. And then we have the Fordney tariff right here. All right. And what happened right here during the Dingley tariff? What happened? Mass economic expansion. What happened after the Fordney tariff in 1922? Mass economic expansion. Smoot-Hawley kicked in. You can say, well, Smoot-Hawley is responsible for the Great Depression. It wasn't, but you can make that argument. But we also had a reduction in tariffs from Finley until the Democrats finally lost their way and the Republicans took back over in 1897. And we had mass economic depression right here, 1893 to 1897. Mass deflation here. It's just a fact. So you can say, but mass growth. So we have tariffs, reduction of tariffs, mass deflation, economic depression, increase in tariffs, mass economic expansion, increase in tariffs, mass economic expansion, high tariffs, mass depression, okay? And then we come all the way down here from 1975 to right about there. What is the median wage of American working family? The median wage has just barely kept up with inflation. Economic growth has been suspect, without question. The economic growth from basically right here, 1995 to today, has been less than 3% a year. And all the right-wing economists will say that's not good enough, but they'll never attribute it to a free trade. They'll always attribute it to anything but free trade. You're like, well, we had economic growth under two huge tariff regimes. We had Dingley and Fordney, and we had mass depression under one anti-tariff regime under the what Grover Cleveland took over, and then under Smoot-Hawley. All right, and so you can say for mass anti-tariff regimes and Grover Cleveland and Smoot-Hawley, we had tariffs. We had mass depression. So we had four major tariffs, two of which had massive economic growth. One had massive depression. One was basically so-so until 1893, but you can't contribute that depression to the McKinley tariff. You just can't. And we've had massive low growth, median wages, low growth of over all the economy since basically 1980s when Reagan took over. Carter, Reagan, whatnot. Now you could say, well, Reagan had mass growth. It did, and we can attribute that to many things, but not since Clinton. Basically from Clinton on, the median wage from Carter on for the American working family has been stagnant, basically just barely keeping up with inflation. That's it. The median wage, the wages for the high earners have gone through the roof because it's all been driven by finance. But finance doesn't drip its way into the broad economy as a whole, as you can see by median wages. Anyway, Thomas DiLorenzo, come on. This is silly. No one's going to sit there and argue that tariffs caused high inflation. No one's going to sit there and argue that tariffs caused deflation. No one's going to sit there and argue these things because they don't. If they do, they just don't know the history. And I'm surprised by Thomas DiLorenzo. No one's going to sit there and say the farmers wanted a gold standard. They didn't. They wanted an income tax, dude. I mean, come on. No one's going to sit there and argue that international trade was very low compared to what it is today. It's just not true. God bless. Love your thoughts. Happy Easter. Jesus is risen.